Today, I'd like to answer a really odd question that we have about the clarinet family, and that is, well, why are there so many different sizes of clarinets? If we look at it, there are clarinets in just about every key you can think of. And historically, pretty much every key of clarinet has been made. But why? Well, let's take a look at some of the history of it. And we're going to start here with the smallest clarinet you'll typically see. This is an E-flat clarinet. Now, I'm using this as a stand-in for the original size of clarinet, which was the clarinet in D. Why was the clarinet first pitched in D? Well, we go back to the Baroque era. The majority of music being written was, well, in the key of D. One, it was the easiest key for string instruments to play in. And still to this day, that's really the favorite key for most string instruments is D. You look at nearly every violin concerto, the big ones, they're all in the key of D. So we'd have a clarinet, well, in the key of D. It would play along really nicely with the strings. Couple that with our trumpet. The trumpets were typically pitched in the key of D as well. It goes hand in hand with the strings. Well, what does the name clarinet mean? It means little trumpet. Clarino was a style of trumpet playing where the top trumpet player would play up in the very highest harmonics of the trumpet's range, up to the 16th harmonic, which a trumpet player today is almost unheard of. That would be a screaming double high C. Well, back then the trumpets were twice the size they are now. So it's a little bit different. But that upper register playing was the clarino, the clarionet. Literally means little clarino, little trumpet. And it was the small size. The size just a little bit bigger than our modern E-flat clarinet, the clarinet in D. The clarinet in E-flat was a sister to that instrument. But we're going to move on from the E-flat clarinet for a moment and talk about, well, a trio. B-flat, A, and C. This, by the time of the era of Mozart, really became this what the clarinetist would show up to a rehearsal with. They had to bring 3 clarinets with them. So, well, why do we have these? And we didn't stick with the small instrument in D. Well, instrument manufacturers started building clarinets in different sizes just to experiment. And one of the first things they found is, man, these little bit bigger sizes sounded a lot better. Well, not necessarily better, but they had a mellower, more pleasing sound. Now, what we see here is a modern Böhm system clarinet. This was developed in the 1830s, 1840s, and it hasn't changed too much since then. But the clarinet in the early classical era only had a handful of keys, maybe as many as 5, as few as 2 or 3. And because of how the clarinet overblows the 12th and not the octave, it did not play chromatically very well. In fact, there were certain notes that it just couldn't play. So if you had something in the key of B flat, F, E flat, A flat, and you wouldn't really go past that because nobody wanted to play in 5 flats, and there's very little literature of the era past 4 flats, you would use the B-flat clarinet, and the B-flat clarinet player would have to play in the key of G, C, F, and B-flat. Simple enough. But what happens if you wanted to play in the key of D, G, one of those keys? You switch to a slightly bigger instrument, the clarinet in A. This would have been there to handle keys like G, A, E, D, of course. And for for keys that are a little bit more neutral, so F, C, and G, you'd have the clarinet in C. Now today, of course, the instruments are fully chromatic. We don't need them necessarily just to be able to play chromatically. That went away by the early 1800s. But what happened is we've noticed that, well, we make the clarinet shorter or longer, they will have different tone colors. And of course they have different ranges. The clarinet in C will go down to a written E, sounding E as well, just below the treble clef, the E in the middle of the bass clef. However, our clarinet in A goes down a third below that, and we get a low C sharp. So we have a difference of a third between them. Also, the bigger the clarinet is, the more mellow it becomes. So our little friend, the E-flat clarinet here, is going to be extremely bright sounding. And then the clarinet in D is a little bit sweeter sounding than that. The clarinet in C is bright and happy, but not nearly as piercing as the E-flat. The clarinet in B-flat is where we start to really get a nice mellow sound. We still have some of the brightness. Half a step lower is not a big difference timbre-wise, but we'll get a little bit warmer sound, a little bit lower sound, a little bit richer sound. And for a while, these were the sizes of clarinets that we had available. And by around the 1880s, techniques were being developed that could make the clarinets a little bit bigger. And one of the first you would get was something called the clarinet d'amore, or a clarinet of love. And the suffix d'amore literally means an instrument pitched a minor third below the standard. And we get a clarinet in G. And this is a clarinet in G. And they would use this, and then they would also use one in F, slightly bigger, which got called the basset horn, which means little bass horn. And the first ones were curved like a horn. And so as the technology developed, we could get a little bit lower, and this goes down another step still. So we're now developing the range, and we're developing a little bit more depth and richness in the tone color. By about 1810, 1820, we're able to make clarinet even bigger, and this is the alto clarinet, originally actually called a tenor clarinet. And the basset horn, developed in the 1770s and 1780s, is a close cousin to this. Of course, I don't own a basset horn because those run about $8,000 to $10,000, and, well, only top-tier orchestras will have those available to them. But the alto clarinet lowers the pitch even further, and we now have low-sounding G-flat at the bottom of the bass clef. But for a while, this was about as low as the clarinet could go. We just didn't have the technology. And along comes a gentleman by the name of Adolph Sax. Now, throughout the early part of the 1800s, there were experiments to make a bigger clarinet, a bass clarinet, one a full octave lower than our standard clarinet. And this instrument here is essentially what Sax came up with. Our modern bass clarinet is derived from Sax's invention, and it's a full octave lower than our standard clarinet. This model goes down to a concert D flat, but modern instruments will go down even lower than that, all the way down to a B flat. So why are there so many sizes of clarinets? Well, it has to do a lot with history. By the time the clarinets became fully chromatic instruments, the major literature had been written. So if we look at our Mozart pieces, Mozart has symphonies where you need the B flat and the A clarinet because you change keys. The Mozart's great clarinet solo pieces, the concerto, the quintet, are for the clarinet in A. This one here. And while it would seem that, well, we can just get rid of the clarinet in A, the literature exists that this instrument pretty much has to stick around. So the clarinetist has to invest in 2 instruments. And then we get the range extension instruments like our bass clarinet, so that we can have a much larger range of sound. So between the bass clarinet here and the E-flat clarinet here, I've got a range of about 5 octaves of sound. Add the contrabass clarinet an octave lower than this, and I've got 6 octaves, and we've got one of the largest ranges of any instrument family. Only the violins really will be able to surpass that. But that's a little bit on why are there so many different sizes of clarinets, and it just boils down to a lot of quirks in history and key development, and well, we've got the instruments and we can't get rid of them, so we're just going to continue to use them, which for me as a composer, I like having tonal differences. It's for me as a composer, it's like having a subtlety between this shade of green and this shade here. It's just, I'm able to get a little bit more nuance in the sound. So, hope you find that informative. I'm going to try and get back to making videos a little bit more regularly. So, until next time.